What a lively old show tonight. And, well, good evening to Sir Rod Stewart, who's just informed me he's watching and enjoying what we're doing tonight. Good evening, Sir Rod. One of the great men in Britain. If only we were more like Rod. In fact, this brings me to our next segment. Has the modern obsession with emotion turned us into a nation of crybabies? Well, here with me are tonight's pack. Talk TV contributor Esther Crackett, still with me, political journalist Ava Santina, my self-declared battle axe, I'm assured, author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton. I don't want to call you that and you burst into tears. It would rather kill the segment, Christine. This all comes apart because Sheila Hancock said it's become fashionable, almost a badge of honour to blub in public. And there's a difference, I think, qualitatively between why people are. If people are at a funeral, of course, they're going to be upset and emotional. I even understand great sporting athletes when they put everything into something. Of course we get that. That's not what she's talking about. She's talking about the general run-of-the-mill kind of what I would call virtue signalling tears, where Hancock was a good example, wasn't he? When he cried to me on Good Morning Britain about the first vaccine and there were no tears. Christine.
He should have spoken to Meghan because she knows how to produce the tears.
Well, she boasted she could cry in 3 seconds.
I mean, this emotion business, it's gone full circle and it's in cycles. It's like climate change. Apparently, back in the first Elizabethan age, the Italians who came here were astonished at how emotional we were. Now, coming from Italians, that's pretty rich. Then it all went completely back in the other direction, the Victorian age and empire, etc., etc., and we all became very stoic and the stiff upper lip, etc., etc. And then we had 2 world wars where that was a very admirable virtue and we wouldn't have got through them without it. Then I think the rot began in the 1960s when it was let it all hang out, you know, and throw it all out there. And if you weren't emoting to everybody, you weren't feeling it, etc.
Well, most of it was down to drugs in the 60s, right?
Exactly.
That's why they're all blubbing.
But then the floodgates really opened when we came to Diana Gate. And then everybody was exploding with this incredible grief, which they were feeling for somebody they'd never, ever met. I mean, to me, you can't feel grief for somebody you don't know. I was very upset when the Queen died, but I wouldn't call it grief.
I did feel a tear well up when the Queen died. So I think you can feel it for people who don't exist. I think you can for people who are not family members. But Ava, there's another part...
Can I just finish that tiny point? Because it's important. Against all that, the Queen, who was showing the traditional British stiff upper lip, was regarded as uncaring and unfeeling because she wasn't emoting all over the place.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, you didn't. You didn't at all. I don't know about that. I think I would actually say I would only implore a stiff upper lip when it comes to things like the Queen dying. I think Sheila herself, Sheila Hancock, who's come out with this bizarre comment about us somehow being softer than we were before, is the one who says she was crying when the Queen died. That, to me, is quite pathetic. I actually think my generation is a lot stronger than those that have gone before.
Really?
And hang on,
I
would just like to say, Christina, I do think it was slightly disingenuous to say that we had a stiff upper lip during the wars. I mean, in the First World War, after that, we had awful PTSD, and actually you'd find men on the streets crying, and that is documented widely in literature. Yeah. So I'm not so sure about your accounts.
No, but all I'm saying is that this goes in secular cycles, as it were, and that the real floodgates opened after Diana, but it started in the 60s. During the war...
It's also what's socially acceptable, isn't it? I mean, you did have men crying in the streets, but it wasn't socially acceptable to just be out there emoting, constantly crying.
I don't think it's socially acceptable now. I actually think that's the reason that we are... That's the reason that...
It's
not socially acceptable not to do it.
People never stop blubbing now.
It's particularly my generation, and I would say it's my generation because it's a very American attitude. It's very, you know, let it all hang out, explore your feelings, get in touch with your emotional side. And it's so infuriating.
Feeling your pain.
Because I just think there's something...
really good accent.
That is annoying,
but there's something remarkable about being stoic and being able to hold it together, because sometimes you're a source of strength for other people.
Do you know what? Here's my overview about this. I think that there's no doubt encouraging people to be more open is a good thing. I've got no problem with that. I think that there's no doubt that men in particular perhaps felt a bit repressed. They weren't able to show. I get all that. That's fine. And I'm not against that at all. But I do think that when it comes to the stiff upper lip, it's become a stick to beat people with, that is somehow offensive to have a stiff upper lip, that it's always a malevolent thing. I don't think it is. No. I actually think if you're able to control your emotions most of the time and not just constantly cry about things, that's quite a good thing too.
Who has ever said that? Do you not remember when...
Every time I mention stiff upper lip, honestly, Twitter goes berserk.
No, that's ridiculous. When
How
George
dare
Osborne
you?
cried at Margaret Thatcher's funeral, he was ridiculed, and rightly so, because it was incredibly embarrassing. That needed a stiff upper lip. I mean, come on.
Sorry, who cried at Margaret?
George Osborne.
George Osborne.
Oh, well.
I do think it's a generational
I'll tell you,
I definitely think it's my
classic,
generation.
the absolute classic movie, Stiff Upper Lip, was, of course, Brief Encounter, with all that repressed emotion. One of the most wonderful movies that's ever been made. If that was made now, the Celia Johnson character would have her kit off in the station.
I just think, you know what, I think here's what I think we've lost. You talk about this generation being stronger. I mean, maybe they are in some ways. I think the problem has become that if you actually go the other way and you say, right, dust yourself down, get back up, do the old Rocky Balboa. It's not how often you get knocked down, it's how many times you get back up and keep moving forward. If you can do that without blubbing all over the place, people now, they criticise you for having that attitude. They think, what, are you telling people to man up? I'm like, well, for want of a better phrase, why not?
Telling you that?
Oh,
Who's saying that?
You've no idea the abuse I get when I say stuff like that.
But maybe man up is not exactly the most appropriate. I think stiff upper lip is fine. Man up, you're essentially saying to a generation where suicide rates are going through the roof that their emotions aren't valid.
Yeah, but actually...
It's not about no emotions aren't being valid.
It's not about people who feel suicidal. It's about when you play sport, for instance, at school. I can remember all the sports teachers like, get up, man up, get on with it. Nothing wrong with that, right? It doesn't mean you're somehow weak, inferior individual. It means get a grip of yourself and get back in.